You're listening to the A County Down Under podcast with me, your host, Caroline McKenna. This is a podcast about being real, about the highs and lows of life. Whether you're living abroad or you're back home, there's a lesson in every episode. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before we get into the podcast episode, guys, I would love if you could please do me a favour and just stop what you're doing right now and subscribe to the podcast, and make sure to give the podcast a rating at the end. It makes such a difference to where my podcast ranks in the charts. So I know so many of you listen and you just don't subscribe. So please, for me, if you wouldn't mind subscribing, and make sure to head over to my website and check out my Sunrise social communities all over the world. So if you're watching my Instagram or TikTok and dream of that life in Australia, you don't have to travel to the other side of the world to enjoy the lifestyle that we live. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Gym Plus Coffee, Ireland's #1 athleisure brand. I have been sponsored by Gym Plus Coffee for the last 4 years, and this is our 6th season of working together. If you're interested in purchasing any of their products, you can use my discount code DOWNUNDER, both online and in store all over the world. Welcome to season 6 of the podcast, guys. I'm in a brand new studio, and this is a new time in my life where I am reflecting back on the last 6 seasons and where I am in my own life at the minute. Currently, I am in Ireland, and so much has happened since we started the podcast. So I thought I would start this episode off by doing a little bit of a topic on people who are moving back home after living abroad. I seem to have a lot of people messaging me recently. They may not live too far away. It could be just over in England, or they live down south, but they have decided to move back home to their local town that they grew up in. And it seems to be this chapter in many people's lives where they've hit the 30 mark and they are readjusting some values of theirs and where they want to see their future. So I have some tips in my own experience of the last year and a half of living at home, and it has been rocky. I have been very open and honest about that and how that has looked. So I'm going to talk you through some of the tips that I have over the last year and a half helped me to settle back into life at home. The first thing I will say is that it is not easy. Coming back after living away for almost 10 years in different countries all over the world has been tough. For me, it feels like the only way I can describe it is it's like you've gone into a time machine and you think that you are going back to that time in your life when you lived at home. And I have stepped into this life and everything has changed. My friends have moved away. People are married. Some of my friends have 2 or 3 kids that I have never even met before. So all these children are running around that I have no relationship with. My relationships with cousins, with siblings have grown distant because we were much closer on FaceTime, but in reality they have their own lives, they have their own jobs to go and do each day, so it can be quite isolating. So you have to allow time. And it was the exact same when I moved away to Australia. And I often say this to people who see little highlights reels online of life abroad. It takes time to adjust. And I always said this from day one of the first episode of the podcast. Life abroad is really hard. My slogan was always the highs and lows of living abroad. And people will say to me till today, they'll say, you never ever mention how difficult it is living abroad. And I always go back to, did you ever listen to my podcast? Because it is so difficult. It takes time. It took me over 3 years to really settle in Australia. And I'm having to give that same time back to moving back home to Ireland. So a year and a half in, and I can honestly say that I am still trying to settle. And there will be days where I think this is amazing and I'm so glad I did this. And other days where I think, why did I do this? Why did I move home when I had such an amazing lifestyle? So here's my strategies for getting back into life at home if that's where you want to be. So I firstly said, allow time to adjust. That takes a long time and it can feel like forever, but time is a great healer. The second thing is to reconnect gradually. Don't expect to go into this life at home just like normal, as if everything's just going to fall back into place, that your friends are going to be able to hang out with you, that the social life is the way it was when you left. Even the gym was the way that you left. Everybody moves on, things change. When I first moved home last year, I felt very much like the black sheep of the family, even at Christmas dinner or around birthday parties and celebrations. I felt like I had nothing in common with my family anymore. And that's not to say that their lives weren't amazing and that they had all these things going on. It just felt like my life was very different. I found that when I was talking to friends, they were talking about people and weddings and, even just like going to the hairdressers and people gossiping. And I felt like, I have no idea who you are talking about. Like, I genuinely have no idea who these people are. So I would switch off very quickly and find that I would lift my phone and try and connect by being online rather than connecting to the physical world. So there was a lot of that going on behind closed doors where I just felt like, God, I don't have a clue what's going on here. It also felt like everybody had got married, and when I was living in Australia, I never felt a sense of my age being something that determined where I was in my life. I always talk about Australia being like a timeless place and being Peter Pan's over there, whereas I find that since coming home at 32, living at home seems very heightened, like living with my parents and not having a ring on my finger and not having a husband and kids and my own house. Whereas that would never have fazed me for the next 5 to 8 years in Australia to be at that stage of my life. So it can feel like you are very on your own, and just know that that is completely normal. But it does not mean that you need to rush into any stages of those life just to try and fit into other people's perception of where you should be. So I'm used to it now where I would have like people say to me, "Oh, you're back home now." Almost like, what happened? And why would you have left? Why have you moved home? And you don't really have to give anyone a reason. But for me, it was for family and to reconnect again. But people think that there must be something more to it. There must be an underlying issue. So just know that I have had those difficult conversations with people of, are you ever going back? Will you stay here long term? What's it like living here in comparison to Australia? And yeah, it can be very difficult. So I've been talking to a lot of people recently who are on the same boat, who have moved back in different areas. And a lot of people would message me on Instagram and say, we gave home a go and we didn't last the year. And I think, God, you really need to give it much longer. And some people message me and they've been home 5 years and they say they still haven't settled. And the thing to do, I would think would be, for me, I would think, oh God, well, they haven't settled, so there's no hope of me settling. But everybody's situations are different. And I am really trying in this stage of my life to say, don't listen to those outside voices where people are telling you how you should feel about being at home. And at times when I do find I'm having a difficult day, those voices will creep in about, that person said online they didn't settle and you're definitely not going to settle. So I have to really take it back to the present moment and say, right, what about today? How is today looking? Today's looking pretty good. And in times where I feel like home's wrecking my head, or, in Australia, we're 10 years ahead in terms of the health system and the education system and mental health. I have to pull it back and say, right, okay, but what was good about today? Well, I sat with my parents and I had a cup of tea. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was in Australia today. I don't have Bondi Beach in front of me every morning, but I would have looked at my pictures online on my camera roll and seen my time in Bondi Beach and thought, God, why did I give that up? But if I looked deeply into those pictures that I'd taken, a lot of the times I was quite lonely or I was missing home. So it's important not to look at your life through rose tinted glasses. Another one of the strategies that I have is to integrate new habits. This has been something I've had to do myself, where my whole lifestyle has changed from being in Ireland. So I've had to integrate new habits to create a new life here for myself, because it really is starting in a whole new country all over again. So one thing that I have really implemented in my time here is sitting down in the evening time with my family with no phone in front of me, because at that time in the evening, Australia is waking up. So it's very easy to go online and compare my life to other people's lives. And I often say comparison is the thief of joy. So instead of being on my phone and scrolling through what all my friends are doing in their amazing lives abroad, I give my phone to my parents like I'm a 4-year-old, you know, handing over my toys. And I get my mum to put my phone away, and I will sit with my family, whether it's to watch something or to just sit out the back on a sunny evening and have a cup of tea and just chat, or not even chat, just sit together with the dog and just relax before or after dinner. So that has been something that I've had to integrate into my habits, because when I did come home, the habits started to creep in where I was sleeping in, and I love getting up early. That was a big part of my life in Australia. I was just having endless cups of tea, getting involved in the gossip at home, getting sucked into the negativity that I found was really detrimental to my mental health. You know, about, look at this weather, isn't this terrible, the cost of living here. It was always negative conversations I was getting myself into. So I've had to really like take a step back and integrate these habits to keep me on the straight and narrow. I find that even like when I go to the hairdressers, or if I'm in the local cafe and some sort of scandals happen in the local town and people try to engage me in the conversation, I have to integrate the habit of removing myself from that, where I'll say, oh God, no, I didn't hear that. And making that person feel like, oh yeah, she really doesn't want to talk about that, because I would find that my own mental health would be impacted by that kind of negativity. So all these little steps have really helped me. Another thing that I have had to do is rain, snow or sunshine, I get up every single morning and start my morning with a walk. I talk about this lots in my ebook, Own Your Morning, about how that morning routine is so important for my life. But I have had to do that because I would like wake up really late whenever I first lived here, and when I first moved home, and I was kind of just lying there, and I had no purpose because I work for myself. I didn't really have anyone to answer to. I kind of got into the holiday mode that never seemed to end when I did first move home. And then, 6 months in, and I had been at home, but I was still in the kind of Christmas mode of getting up when I want, doing very little that day, maybe watching a movie, watching a Netflix series. So I've had to implement that routine, and starting my morning with a walk really just reassesses my outlook on the day ahead, and just a bit of fresh air can do so much. I don't really like to start my morning with heavy exercise or conversations with people, and that's why I started my Sunrise Social. It was just kind of a way for people to connect without having to do 100 burpees in the morning or have like really detailed conversations when you haven't even had your coffee yet. But I love to start my morning off with a very calm and quiet walk with my dad, and he knows to not talk in those situations. So that is another thing that I've had to do. I think the biggest challenge for me since moving home is finding friends. And I would be such an outgoing person who loves to connect with new people. But coming back to my hometown at 32 and trying to connect with people who have their own lives, and many of them who have got their own families now, it's very difficult because yes, they're really glad to have you home, but they can't see you all the time. Whereas when I lived in Australia, my social life and my lifestyle revolved around being around people all the time, whether it was housemates or being at school or going for a coffee before or after work. There was always people throughout my whole day. And I do love my own company, but I also know that in certain circumstances, there's a lot of isolation here for me. So I've had to really reintegrate myself in terms of joining run clubs and like joining the local gym and like trying to strike up conversations rather than just sitting with my earphones in and doing my workout, which is what I usually love to do. But I really had to step out of my comfort zone, and it hasn't been easy. I mean, I've made friends throughout the last year and a half, and after a couple of coffees with making these friends, I'm like, this is really not my person. I've often talked about my experience with now I don't drink, so socializing for me looks very different to what it did a couple of years ago, where I would have made best friends in a girl's bathroom. And now it's like, right, okay, if I don't go out and try and do things like a run club or the gym, I will literally be on my own. So having to navigate that has been very difficult. But you have to do these things and you have to give it a go. There's no point in saying that home isn't working for you if you're not taking the steps to make it work for you. Stay open-minded. That's another one that I would suggest. Like, don't just rule it out straight away that this isn't working for you, or I shouldn't have moved home, or my life was so much better. You just have to stay open-minded. There's so many good things that come from moving back home. Like I just really thrive on the fact that life is at a much slower pace here, and I would have always been caught up in the rat race in Sydney, and I loved it. I loved being busy all the time. But there's days where I will drive through my local town, my hometown, Newcastle, and it's a Monday midday and the street is dead. And when I first moved home, I was like, oh my God, this is awful. Like, how am I going to, like, what am I supposed to do with myself here? There is nothing to do. And I've had to stay open-minded, and it's been challenging. But as time has evolved, like my mindset has now changed to, like, if I just want to go home and have a cup of tea, it's okay. Like there's this kind of calmness in all the madness because I'm used to being so fast paced, but it's okay to actually slow down because life isn't meant to be lived in the fast lane all the time. It's not healthy. It's not good for you. There's so much of my last 4 years of being in the fast lane that I haven't really been present at all with friends, with partners, with work colleagues, and with students, that now I'm like, I can actually just slow down and take each day as it comes and not feel like I have to do all 50 things on my checklist on that Monday morning, that I can actually spread them out nicely throughout the week and just be at peace with that. One thing that I will say as well is set new goals for yourself. Whenever you've achieved everything you've wanted to achieve, like for me, my goal was to travel the world and to live in different countries, and to have achieved pretty much all of my goals at 32 and more of my goals. Like I never expected all of these things that have happened within business, within my career, within travel. I would say that like when I did come home, there was that kind of sense of, I often talk about Tyson Fury when he became world champion. What's next? Like I've done it all. And then I would dwell on what I didn't have. Oh, well, I don't have a husband and I don't have kids and I don't have a house. But that's not what I want right now. But I was dwelling on those things because I had no new goals. So I set myself some new targets, and they were crazy ones that I had never anticipated. One was going to Wim Hof. One was climbing Kilimanjaro. They don't need to be that extreme, but like maybe there's a country in Europe that you have always wanted to travel to and you couldn't travel to because you lived so far away. So for me, a big one was celebrating St. Patrick's Day in New York. I never got to do that in all my life, and I always wanted to do something like that. But living in Australia, you were just so far removed from the rest of the world that it was just physically, well, not physically impossible, but financially very like unattainable because it was just so far away. So doing little things like that have really helped me. So every few months I set myself goals, whether it's, I want to be able to run 10K by the end of the month and compete in a run or a marathon. Whether it's I want to go to Bali in August, so I'm going to work really hard and keep in routine until then. So definitely travel has been a huge thing for me. Opening up my own new business, setting goals personally in terms of I want to make sure that, by the end of this month that I don't have work on a Friday and that I take a Friday off so that I spend that entirely with my family, because the weekends are usually busy with friends or work commitments, traveling away for work. So little things like that can make such a difference. Document your journey. You don't need to be an Instagrammer to do this, but I think it's really nice to document where you are and how far you've come. I wrote a letter to myself and I was very honest with myself and said, look, this is why you're moving home. This is how you're feeling in your life. This is where you want to go with your life. And there's going to be times when you're at home that you're going to think, I wish I didn't give up this life in Australia. But this is your reminder in this letter of why you left. And I often look back in that letter and think, oh my God, I was so afraid of moving home and going into the unknown. And so much has changed in my life since then. So I would highly recommend getting a diary and just like airing out your feelings, because there will be times where it's really challenging. There's going to be days where you feel like that was amazing. But definitely document where you are in your life. And also just writing a gratitude list at the end of each day has been such a huge help for me, because in my life in Australia, like a week for me could look like doing a helicopter ride over Sydney Harbour, going whale watching like across the water in Bondi Beach, seeing the most epic sunrise. Like these were like things that I was doing on a weekly basis that were amazing, absolutely amazing. And then to compare that to life in Ireland, you know, that week very little might have happened. I might have finished a season on Netflix, something like that. So I have to really dig deep for those little things of gratitude. Like today, my niece said my name, or today my niece took her first steps and I got to be there for that. Or someone stopped me in the coffee shop and said, thanks so much for your podcast. I really enjoyed it. So I have to really dig deep for those little things. And it's only whenever you reflect back at the end of that day that you think, actually, do you know what? I thought today wasn't that great of a day, but it was actually a pretty amazing day because of these little things that I probably wouldn't have remembered had I not sat down at the end of the evening for 5 minutes and taken that on board. So those are little things that have helped me. And I'll just finish off with this one thing that has really been so important for my whole life, but especially since moving home. Well, two things actually. The one thing is seek help if you're struggling. Like there has been many times where I have not been finding home that easy, and I will just go and get my nails done or go to the hairdressers or go to my cousin and get my eyebrows done, and I'll have a wee cry and just say, like, this is hard. I'm finding this really lonely. And then I come out like half an hour later feeling so much better, because they're like, yeah, it's normal to feel like that. Or, you know, just know that we feel like that too. Just because I have kids running around doesn't mean that I don't get lonely. So that has been a huge help to me. But lastly is self-care. I have taken a lot of care of myself in like my routine, in my skincare, in how I go to the gym each day for my own mental health, for my physical health. You know, I try and like eat well each single day, but I also treat myself to something nice at the end of the week. So self-care has been the biggest thing for me, because I think like this is a time in my life when it's all about self-care. It's not about what I need to achieve financially, career-wise, love, relationships. I feel like I am parking all of those things for my own self-care. And when you focus in on yourself, it's in those moments that everything unravels. So if you are in the process of moving home, or you've been at home for a long period of time and you're struggling, just know that like it's normal to feel like that, and I totally get it. But just come back to your why. Why did you move home? And if you were to go, which I often say to myself when I have a bad day, I'm away back to Australia, I go up to my room, have a wee cry, and I think to myself, do you actually want to move back to Australia? Like, you're right here with your parents and your family, and is this actually where you want to be, or is it back in Australia in the rat race again? And I've done that stage in my life, so I have to be like, no, Caroline, like stop huffing and stop taking a hissy fit here. You're totally fine. So come back to your why. And thank you for listening to this short and sweet episode of the podcast, and see you next time.